Okay, good morning everybody. All right, that's a very good welcome. So I feel happy. I've been feeling a little bit sick these past days. This is the season. The weather is changing, so this is the time when I get sick. So I have been living away. I have been living away from my country for over half of my life, but still I cannot get used to the cold. Every time winter is coming, I always have to pray that I don't get sick. So weather acculturation is difficult for me still. All right. So if you realize when we talk about culture, like I told you, we've been looking at the African culture a little bit, but not in details, right? Because I focus on acculturation and health. So so we just look at the elements that are associated with deterioration of health. For example, the fact that people leave their country, they go through acculturation stress, and that stress, you know, will be maybe responsible for some diseases and stuff like that. We also talk about the diet changes, right? Dietary acculturation. You are used to certain food. For example, we look at staple foods in some parts of Africa, right? And then these people have to change their country. And when you change your country, you change many things. Among them is also the kind of food that you have to eat. And we often think, is acculturation making people sick? All right? Is adapting to a new culture make me sick? Okay? So, for example, if you look at your PPT, because on Monday we look at a little bit the problem of obesity in the African population, all right? And we also talk about a relationship, the direct relationship with hypertension. For example, when we look at the east part of Africa, we talk, for example, about the Ethiopians, right? A lot of them, as you can see on your PPT, when a number of them, when they went to Israel, a big number of them, we just found out that 20% of the Ethiopian men developed hypertension. All right, suddenly. So, you know, we know that when they came, they were relatively healthy, and suddenly, level of high blood pressure went down. So we need to understand what is happening. All right. So we want to understand what is happening. Also, 43% of women, 30% of men just found out that the risk of developing cardiovascular disease is also there. And as you know, what did we study a couple of last week? We say that high blood pressure is a cardiovascular disease risk factor, which means that if you have high blood pressure, you know, there's a risk that you may develop other disease as well. Okay, okay? So, I'm not, for this class, contrary to the other nutrition class, we don't really go into details about the mechanism and what is really taking place. Basically, the simple thing that not working, we can look at it is simple definition of what hypertension is, or in some cases, high blood pressure. We usually talk about blood pressure, all right? So, oftentimes, you will get like to measure the systolic one, so when the heart, you know, is beating, and we have the second measure, which is the diastolic one, when the heart is more, is now relaxing. So at the hospital, or even, I think in Korea here, which is very good, you can actually even go to the mall, or some subway stations, all right? And you can take your blood pressure, all right? You know, just squeeze your hand there, and it will give you two measures. right? The systolic one and the diastolic one. So, how do we know? So we hope that when you read the two measures, when you have high blood pressure, you have high blood pressure, reading the two measures, like I wrote, when the systolic one is over 140 and the more relaxing one is over 90. Then we can talk about having a problem of high blood pressure. But generally speaking, we hope that your normal blood pressure will be less than 130, right? So, and 85 for the diastolic one. This is like, we say like the normal blood pressure. Okay? So generally speaking, this is when we're mentioning it. So, like I told you, as you know, as we've been studying it, so being in Korea is a little bit challenging talking about acculturation. Why? Because Korea is actually new in terms of immigration. It's only these past years that we're having many foreigners coming to Korea. Not only coming to visit, but deciding that I'm coming to live in Korea. Because when we talk about acculturation, we refer to immigrants, people who just say, hey, you know what? I'm leaving my country, I'm going to settle in this new country, I'm going to live there. Most immigrants that we talk about in Korea are usually these foreign women who are married to Korean men, mostly coming from Vietnam, the Philippines. So we mostly talked about these people, and actually wrote an article about the health of these women who suffer a lot of time of depression, which is a mental health problem, right? So most of the time people will investigate these people, mostly these women here in Korea. So Korea is pretty new in terms of immigration. This is why I often talk about the USA and to some measure Canada, because these are two big countries in terms of immigration. The advantage in USA is diversity, the cultural diversity, because when you go, for example, in the US, there is you see people from different backgrounds, you see people from different religions, consequently different cultures, right? But as you know, in Korea, even though in the text we talk about Korea as a multicultural country now since 1996, it's not so obvious so far, right? And there are even certain words that are now forbidden to be used in Korea. For example, talking about pure blood, right? Oftentimes in Korea we talk about pure blood, meaning like you're really a pure Korean. And then we ask the question of identity. What does it mean to be Korean? Right? Because, for example, if a child is born in Canada or a child is born in the US, he is naturally Canadian or US citizen, right? But in Korea, we are still learning to really cope with cultural differences, right? So we're learning to kind of integrate all the culture. Daegu is a great place for it. We have a colorful Daegu every year where we have different communities in the city celebrating their identity. Then we often ask, when I talk about culture, I gave you a simple definition, but culture basically is who you are. Okay? Culture basically is who you are, or what makes you, right? What you believe, what are your values? And in that culture, who are you? We talk also about your language, all right? This is who you are. And when I discuss with the graduate students, we also talk about what? Your music. what you listen to, all right? How do you dress? This is who you are. And in a multicultural society, for example, I live in Toronto for many years, so when you meet people on the street, you can have an idea of where they come from, and they don't feel like, oh, I'm out of place, all right? Just the way they dress. So the dressing style gives them their cultural identity. It tells me who they are. And even when we talk about the African culture, we talk a little bit about the food, but there are other elements as well. People from Morocco, the traditional way of dressing is different from people from Central Africa, for example, where I come from, or how people celebrate the marriage. For example, in Korea, you wear the hanbok for the traditional thing. So it's really who you are. So now in Korea, we have to cope with that. And who you are here, is mainly influenced by what? You become you because of, one, your family. Because if you are Korean, if Korean means I look Korean, and you are adopted by an African family, trust me, you will love the kind of music that I love, and you will be dancing like me, right? Yeah. Even though you look Korean. Yeah, you should listen to some of my good African songs. Even when you're sad, it just makes you happy. All right? You don't need soju when you listen to African songs. So, partly, your family will influence you. And the other factor that is influencing you is the host country. The host country, meaning, the society. Even your friends at school will influence you. These are the two main factors associated with acculturation. When I go visit my parents, in Gabon, it's funny, they often think that I have changed a lot. But in my heart, I always thought that I didn't change. But I think that I don't understand these African values, how to do this, how to speak in a certain way. All right? But when I was in Canada for many years, in my heart, I never felt like I was Canadian. I always felt like, oh, I'm a foreigner. All right? And when I went back to my country to visit, I just felt like a foreigner too. Because many things, I left my country, I was 17, right? And I went back 10 years later, and I was lost. Many things I did not understand. I was just happy. So what does it mean? That the adaptation, right, the change that took place in me over many years, sometimes we don't realize that change is taking place, all right? And we become maybe a different person, but most importantly, we are still human beings. And this is why university is the best place to be, because university means unity in diversity. Unity meaning together, diversity meaning we are all different. That's the beauty of university. All right. And this is why we have to look at some of these factors. And now, I find myself here in Korea. You have to adapt again to a new culture. 안녕하세요. Things like that. All right? You have to learn to eat the Korean food and learn Korean manners. If I don't do that, I will be kind of outside of the mainstream society. And this is why many foreigners, they will go through some type of health problems. Why? Because they cannot find themselves in the society. They cannot relate. All right? So, this is why, what is my sponge? This is why I want to talk to you about three phases of acculturation before we enter into these things. So there are three three phases of acculturation. All right. So, and because we are at university, university is the best place because, for example, in this class, is probably the best group in terms of the mix that I had in 5 years here at Kenya, because we have students from different parts of Asia, from Europe. Of course, we have the Korean, and we have the so African in me. So we have the whole world in this class, all right? And even you as Korean, I've been teaching some of you guys for 3-4 years. You also change. Why? Because you come in contact with me. When you come in contact with me, you just realize he's different. He's not like a Korean professor. You know, he doesn't speak my language. So how do I talk with him? How do I relate with him? So these are serious questions. So even you go through cultural change. So the three phases, the first one is what I talk about, I just mentioned you, is contact. Here, I'm going to give example in terms of education, okay? We're talking about education, for example. So what is the contact, for example? So we have, for example, in this class, we have students from France, all right? Or we can have an African student. So we have, for example, let's take, because we talk about the African problem of hypertension. So we have these African student, all right? What happens is he enters what? He enters Korean school. So the first one is contact. So this foreign student, this African student, he comes into the school. Wow, he's different. All right? So that's the first contact. Right? That's the first contact. Just like, oh, okay, somebody is different, and everybody is different, right? When he's in his country, he's not different, he's just like anybody else. Okay? And then he enters into the school. So this is the first contact. Even for you guys, you come to Kenya for the first time, and then you are happy to come to class, and then they tell you, oh, this is your professor, Obiang-Obounou, Brice. Man, the name is so long, just like, oh my gosh. I mean, this is kind of an experience, right? The first contact is different, all right? So acculturation is not only one way, it's both sides. Just like, you don't know how to feel, just like, oh, okay, what am I going to expect from this one? Okay? So, the second one, that is, now, after the contact, there is a conflict. All right? After the contact, there is a conflict. What is a conflict? A conflict is a problem. Okay, okay? A conflict is a problem. For example, this was my surprise when I came to Korea, for example. A lot of a lot of young Korean people, especially students, right? Young students, they learn English, and this is good, but I was surprised. You know, I asked, say, what is your name? Okay, my name is Jion. And then she said, oh, but my English name is, you know, Alice. My English name is, you know, I'm just like, what does it mean? So it can become conflictual, because if you go to a school and the teacher tells you, oh, okay, your name is not Azira, it's kind of difficult to say Azira or Mohammed, you know, I'm just going to call you Brice, right? You know, I often tell people Brice is easy to remember. If you like the rice, you must like me, you just put B in front. Yeah, isn't it? Brice, I eat the rice, so I just put B, and I will never forget that name anymore for the rest of the life, right? But how would you feel if today I just say Mohammed oh man, that name is so complicated to pronounce. Is it okay if I call you Bob? You see what I'm saying? But these are serious conflicts. For example, when Hispanic students, they go to the US and, sometimes we want to translate their name, right? For example, in France, the name John in French is Jean, right? Jean. And then you come to the US, you're coming from France, and then they say now, oh, Jean, okay, actually the translation in English is John. I'm going to call you John. And at first you may just be like, oh, hey mom, I'm John. No, I'm just like, your birth certificate is Jean. No, but they say it's the same thing. And then there is a conflict. Why there is a conflict? Because your identity is now changing. Alright? Because culture is also your name. Your identity is who you are. And we have that. We have a lot of those things that are taking place even in a school setting. And that may create a lot of stress and to some extent health problems for people. The last phase, the third phase of acculturation is what we hope is what? Adaptation. Alright? This is the last phase, adaptation. And that's what did we say about adaptation? Alright? We say that adaptation is what? Yeah, I'm adopting the Korean culture, but I also, gonna keep my culture. So I'm navigating in both. So now, for example, in the education setting, now, Jean, coming from France, he's now learning a new language. He's now learning English. Alright? So, Gion is not Maria or Clara. She's still Gion, but she's learning English. Alright? She keeps her identity, but she also adapts the new country's cultural values. Right? Because language is culture. You understand? Very, very important. So the problem of acculturation, for example, when we talk about this, because African people are very strong into their culture, this is how we do things and things like that. And then when they go to the US, for example, in Africa, we don't respond to our parents. Alright? But when you go to America, children, they talk to their parents. They're not happy and they just express it. Alright? And then when these children come home, they talk to their parents. And the parent just like, what's wrong with this guy? And then he tried to whoop him. And then he said, hey, if you whoop me again, I will call 911. Right? I called the police. And the father said, oh, okay, if you call the police, I'll send you back to Africa. And you're going to stay with your grandmother, right? So acculturation is not always an easy transition, especially for people who are much older. Much easier for the kids, right? Right? So, for example, my son, he goes to international school, but he speaks good Korean. I don't. Alright? So it's much easier for children because he has like a lot of Korean friends. So he adapts easily into the environment. He goes to the taekwondo, he learns Korean things and whatever. Alright? So these are the things. Alright, so, but talking about hypertension, like I told you, in Korea, we haven't done much studies on foreigners. But I've done some studies on foreigners, and yesterday I received a good news of a paper that I wrote a couple of times ago. This is the paper that I wrote on Korean language proficiency, duration of residence, and self-reported hypertension among foreign-born populations in Korea. All right. So this paper will be published this month. So here I investigated over 900 foreigners living in Korea. Okay. So and divide them into different countries of origin, and then I separated into countries of origin. I just wrote a new one specifically on English speakers. So I'm going to share this result with you and really show you the impact of acculturation on the society, the impact of acculturation on foreigners, right? In the case of Korea. Oftentimes, we talk about acculturation in the US and Europe, but I've been doing my research in two areas. I study a lot on acculturation in the health, and I also do research on obesity and diabetes on molecular medicine. So these are the two areas I look at this time. So let me show you a little bit. You don't have this one. I always update my notes. Here, what do you have here? You may not see clearly, but on this table, what I found out is there is no relationship between the ability to speak Korean and the problem of hypertension. And I asked myself, why? Oftentimes, do you remember the variable that we use for acculturation? Do you remember? Do you remember the variable? What are the three main variables I gave you last time for acculturation? So, I use, the variables that I use are what? The number one is what? Language. Remember? We use language. The second one that I gave to you was which one? But this is just this is dietary acculturation. Duration of stay. So, how many years have you been in Korea? Okay? We measure how long have you been in Korea. Okay? So, and of course, I look at the age. We can look at age at immigration, and we can also look at age at interview. So, the variable are here. What is the outcome? Outcome is what? Is high blood pressure. Alright? Also, yeah. The recent article that I wrote is on cardiovascular risk factors. So we look at different diseases, such as different problems, like diabetes, smoking, physical activity. But in this one, I didn't necessarily go in depth into this one. Alright? So, I have the acculturation factor variables, and then the outcome is, the problem is what? High blood pressure. Alright? So, now, when you look at the p-value, if it's below, let's say if it's below 0.05, 95% interval, 95% here, then it's significant. You cannot see? Cannot see? Language. You want me to write yep again? Alright. So now, let's look at it. We just like, so the first thing that we look, just like, normally what I've been saying to you is, if you go, for example, in the US or in Canada, if you cannot speak English, you cannot speak French, it's difficult for you even to go to the hospital to get a job or to do anything, right? That is going to cause a lot of stress, and consequently the problem of blood pressure, right? It will happen. But we just realized that, oh, language is not a big factor in Korea. And I wonder why. Just realized Korea is a different platform in the way that if you speak English in this country, you are good. Alright? I mean, you drive on the street, it's written in Korean and it's also written in English. Okay? Yesterday I went to the hospital here. Not our hospital, I went to the Songso-wan. There was a young medical doctor, he speaks perfect English. So no stress for me. But when I have an urgent matter, you always have, because English in Korea is a tool for advancement. So everybody must learn English in Korea. If you want to have a better job, you learn English, right? So a lot of services in Korea are offered in English. So even when I call the bank, first you have a message in Korean, and then they tell you for English, press 9, and then I press 9. Life is good. If you go to the US, there is no option for, if you want service in Korean, press 2. And so then it becomes stressful. So language is an important factor. But in this case, language was not a factor. All right? Because people who speak English in Korea, who are foreigners, they can navigate easily in the Korean society. Because even though English is not official language in Korea, is commonly used. So if you look at this one, for example, the African people in Korea, 15% of them have a problem with high blood pressure. That's pretty high. All right? You have the p-value here, 0.047, which is significant, right? So now let's look at North American people from the US. 13.8% of them have problem with high blood pressure. Okay? It's also, and we look at, now let's look at the gender. We compare male and female. What do we find out here? Males, 16.8% of men reported to have high blood pressure, compared to women, only 9.1%. So we ask the question, okay, what is happening? So we'll go a little bit further. Just remember the picture that I gave to you in the middle in terms of obesity and relationship with high blood pressure and other non-communicable disease. All right. It's also very significant here, the gender problem. Remember that gender, I put it as a non-modifiable factor for cardiovascular risk factors. All right. So another element that is important here, I don't know if I mentioned it, is age. Look at here. If you are over 40, 26.8% of people who are over 40 have high blood pressure. And 24% of people over 50 have high blood pressure. So age is a serious factor in terms of high blood pressure. All right? And of course, body mass index. If your BMI is over 25, overweight or obese, 19.6% reported to have high blood pressure. So this is actually pretty high. So in average, when we look at it, it was around 13%. So this is above the average population who has high blood pressure. So you see, it's really, really significant here. So almost 20%. So which means what? 20%, right, of the people who say to have high blood pressure are actually overweight or obese. So this is when we investigated foreigners in Korea. So now let's look at this one. Here, what are the risk factors? If you are over 40, you are almost 4 times, look at here, almost 4 times, the risk is, over 4 times higher than people who are under 40 years old to develop high blood pressure. Okay? But then we can ask the question, is it really Korea or it just, Because sometimes I think that, acculturation is kind of a normal process in life. And as you get older, your health kind of goes down a little bit. So I look at this one. If you are overweight, you are almost 3 times, likely to develop high blood pressure. The old ratio is almost over 3 times higher than the other people. And if you are a female, it's less likely. But what was important is what? One of the risk factors for cardiovascular disease, what did I tell you? I said, if one of your parents, has hypertension, maybe there is a chance that you may develop the disease. All right. So what we found out here is that if one of your parents, among the people that I interviewed, those who say that, oh, my dad or my mom has high blood pressure, they were over 4 times likely to develop high blood pressure. Okay? So you see that what we've been studying is really in correlation with the research that we have been doing on acculturation and health. All right? So, we don't have a big African population, for example, in Korea, but these are elements that we can look at. All right. So you still have the same definitions here in terms of high blood pressure. This part you have that on your PPT, so I will not go over it. But now, how serious is high blood pressure? We mentioned it before. High blood pressure can be associated with different other elements, such as stroke, as you know. You can look at the picture related to probable obesity again. All right. Easily get a heart attack. So it's something that we have to monitor. All right. Heart failure, kidney failure, and possibly the risk of blindness. All right. But all these diseases are often very much correlated. Right. So just keep that in mind for you who may want to pursue your studies and do some research in this area. It will be interesting because the country is changing, and as it changes, we have to implement new policies. Okay. Yeah, okay, it's 9 a.m. in the morning, and a lot of you guys look very tired. So now, I would like to conclude with this. I will not look, like I said, I will not look at the Western, the European food and culture because of the time that we have left. And many of you need to prepare for the dietitian exam, right? So the last chapter that we're going to see will be on planning a healthy diet. Why? So far, we looked at the problem of acculturation and health. And we talk a lot about culture. Oh, culture is this, culture is that, and sometimes it's not very accurate. Right? Now, we have to go and really show people now how they should plan their diet when we talk about dietary acculturation. Okay? So that will be the last chapter that we're going to see next week. That will be the last chapter. And then we probably have a session of revision together. And we can prepare for the final exam, and you can be happy, and I hope you will all pass the dietitian. I see people with big smile, so that's good. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for today, and just keep in mind some of the things that I want you guys on the board, and as we prepare for the last chapter. Okay. Have a nice day.